Hello whisky fans, Ralphie here in The Whisky Bothy with review number 1099 extras, extra content, extra opinion, extra perspective, extra delivery of experience. And my conversation with you today is basically sharing what I think about wine finishes in whisky. And we know that there's been a growing popularity for this because it's perceived by whisky producers that it brings diversity to the portfolio of product. So that if you like the standard whisky, you may be inclined to try the port version, the sherry version, the Moscato version, the Riesling version, the tequila version, the Muscatel version, the Sauternes version, the ice wine version, the cider version, the Guinness version, and on and on and on and on we go. In fact, anything apart from herring that's been stored in a wooden oak cask is up for consideration. And the first thing I would say is that often people focus on the previous content of that cask, whether it be sherry, marsala, port, Madeira, Palo Cortado, Amontillado, and people don't really think so much about the actual quality of the oak used in that cask. And then when the distillers get the casks, they'll smell the cask for its sweetness. How fresh is it? Because bear in mind, most wine is made 12 to 14% volume, because that's basically fermentation strength. So it means that when the cask is emptied and being sold on, it doesn't take long in the heat of the European Mediterranean countries, for example, where the ABV, residual alcohol inside the cask, is going down to such a low extent that bacteria can now start to grow and sour the cask and destroy the cask, because there's not enough alcohol left in the cask to kill off the bacteria and stop its development. And this means that the distillers, when they get the casks, they're asking, well, how fresh are they? What's the actual quality of what we're getting? What's the quality of the previous content? Is it worth us just putting the whisky straight in to this empty cask with a little bit slushing about in the bottom, but it's intact? So we're going to literally have more physical content within the whisky, despite that the fact that our product is 100% single malt Scotch whisky. It's not. It's 100% Scotch malt whisky and cask influence. That cask influence is not just the wood. It's the charring, it's the toasting, it's the preparation protocol that some distillers do use. And also it's just simply previous content of that cask. Sometimes there's no previous content, as in virgin casks. And they need to be toasted. They really do need to be conditioned some way to get rid of the green sappiness which can spoil the whisky badly. But some wine casks, you've got quite a heavy influence and you start to see the whisky turn a shade of red. If you've got more redness in a red wine matured Scotch whisky, it means literally, physically, there's more red wine in it, and therefore more red wine to influence the flavour. It really depends whether the wine has been influencing the cask for 6 weeks or 6 months. That makes a huge difference to the result. If it's only 6 weeks, what you've got is a superficial overcoat, which may or may not lift off the glass of whisky you've just poured after about 10 minutes and then disappear, which makes it hardly even worth buying the finish. You may as well have bought the basic, the core range. But if it's 6 months, you've got something much more meaningful. You've not just got the influence of the previous wine, whether it be Sauternes or whether it be... There's so many to choose from. A Chianti, a Lambrusco, Tempranillo, all these infinitesimal amount of options. But you've got the quality of the wood they came in. Many European wine brands are matured in barriques. Barriques are made up of European and European-related oaks. This is important because when they're now being used for wine, they actually deliver more complex wood flavours into the result. So you can get a wine finished whisky, which is not just the wine that's finishing it, it's the cask oak that's finishing it as well. So you've got that additional, optional, added extra oak cask influence of, say, Slovenian oak, Slovakian oak, Polish oak even, Romanian oak. It could be Turkish oak. You know, there's oak trees in Turkey. And over in the borders and even into Russia, there is wine making. There's active wine making regions that use the best of casks because there's no demand for it. There's no competition. There's no pressure in these casks. You may find that you've got a cask influence from a wine cask which never held wine in the first place, and therefore you're getting exclusively oak cask influence, not previous content influence, despite the fact that it says it's a wine cask. Sure, it's a wine cask, but wine producers will always order surplus casks to requirement so that none of their annual harvest goes to waste. Because wine, as soon as it's fermented, needs to go into the casks to reduce further excessive and active oxidization. Wine cask influences can send whiskies into weird and wonderful directions. Take Balachen, for example, which is peated Edradour. I've tasted some Burgundy and Bordeaux matured and secondary finished Balachens, which were absolutely bonkers. I mean, they were amazing, interesting whiskies, but they're not ones you would pour for your auntie to see in the new year, because she would wonder if you're poisoning her. That's the fact of it. You get some very, very strange flavours appear, particularly with heavily peated whiskies. And yet other heavily peated whiskies like the Sinclair series from Lecheik, the Rioja, which were very reasonable priced bottlings, amazing red wine peated whiskey matured result. Very, very impressive, great value for money. And to be honest, I see that style of whiskey disappearing before too long. I think wine producers are getting better at managing wine casks within their portfolio in the warehouse. I think as they gain more experience, it starts to show in the product. I've just reviewed an Isle of Arran, which is a Douro Discovery, they call it. This is edition 3, signature series. So it's a red wine matured Isle of Arran. But the important thing here is that the core whisky, which is 12-year-old, and which I've talked about in my last review, number 1099, is a really good single malt in its own right. It's just been given this little bit of extra influence, very light, very restrained, actually quite delicate. They could have actually imposed more on it, on a flavour, the red wine flavour, into it, because it's pretty solid red wine casks, but they didn't. They erred on the side of caution. It shows, but still a great result. But a word of caution here, there are some distilleries, more in the past, because it was less talked about, who would get underactive, non-maturing cask versions of their whisky, and they would put it into a red wine cask to tart it up a bit and make it more palatable. You'll find this a lot with red port casks, because red port adds a lot of colour. It tends to move very quickly in influencing a whisky, because that's the nature of port. And recently we've seen the fact that what was traditionally red port finishes have moved on. You've got tawny ports, you've got white port now. There's been a fashion over the last couple of years for white port matured whiskies, many of which have done really, really well, because white port really suits whisky. But it wasn't used previously because there's so little white port made. It wasn't important, it didn't matter. I remember back in the early 2000s, it was Glenmorangie were the distillery that paved the way with finishes. They brought out a sherry finish, they brought out a port finish, they brought out a number of finishes, and the port really, really worked well. It was the most successful of the lot. I remember as a 14-year-old whiskey, I really enjoyed it. And there was a good distinctive colour in the whiskey. I think at the moment the distillers are frightened that the whiskey gets too much out of colour due to cask influences. But I would say to the distilleries, don't worry about it. It all boils down to the flavour, particularly when you're catering for the informed, educated, and the whiskey drinker that's looking for that extra experience, that unusual experience. And so long as the components are quality, you're going to get quality results. My final word is this. We're going to see more finishes as time goes on, but we're also going to see more better finishes, simply because the industry is gaining more experience. Because those brands who have been weak with their finishes, and I'd say Glenmorangie knows it's got a reputation for variable finishes, because it's a very light style of Highland malt. They know that some of them work amazingly well and others are not working at all. And what they've got to do is, if any distillery has a finishing cask that's not working, you basically decant out the finishing cask back into a refill bourbon cask and just let the whole damn thing settle down for a couple of years, and you'd just be amazed at how the results improve. Because it's just the way casks work. Anyway, you're not here to listen to Ralphie here in the Whiskey Bothy bump on for too long about cask culture. It's a fascinating thing to deep dive in, and in particular, when you're at distilleries, the small distilleries, the ones that don't chill filter their product and that don't have sanitised tours, feel free to ask these questions about all the different casks that they use and how the different casks work and affect the distillery signature, because these are not questions that your tour guide gets very often. And usually they find that these unusual questions are the most interesting, because that's where they learn as well as us. And there you have it. Hope you've enjoyed this. We'll see you soon. And if you haven't subscribed, shame on you. There's still times to subscribe. And by the way, I do have a Patreon channel. Extra content, extra videos, and monthly live streams, including the occasional extra live stream that lasts up to 2 hours, if not more, question and answers and all the rest of it. So just letting you know that the option's there. And there's a Discord channel attached to my Patreon channel as well. Really good quality conversations, and importantly, sharing of information on buying our bottles before they sell out too quickly. Do you know the script? You know what the script's like. We'll see you soon. Clivey Clicker, red button says off.